Welcome to Computational Mathematics 1.1. Today, all we're going to do is use Python to solve a simple distance equals speed times time equation. Now, what do we need to know to do that? Well, when we have an equation like that, we've got three variables. We've got the distance, we've got the speed, and we've got the time. And we need to know two of those in order to solve for the third one. So in our case, we're going to know speed and time, and we're going to use that to work out distance. So the first thing we need to do is input speed and time. Now, for those of you who may have seen my mathematical modeling video, this is known as the user input. So this is what the user will put in as known quantities that we then will use to calculate other quantities. So how do we do that using Python? Well, before we go into that in a bit more detail, we're going to use the input command, but not input numbers, but input an answer to a question. So input is the command that allows us to do that. It allows the user to input an answer to a particular question. In this case, our question is going to be, how are you? And the inverted commas signifies that that's a question, or technically we call that a string. A string is a single set of characters being the individual building blocks of the question, so the letters H, O, W, etc. So we're going to input how are you, and then what I'm going to do, I'm going to run that. So it comes up with the question, how are you? And then I'm just going to be nice and put, I am fine. Okay, great. But nothing has really happened here, to be honest. We've just typed an answer now. Now, there's a flaw to this problem, and it is this. If I run that again, I could put pancakes. I can't spell pancakes, but whatever. So, and again, that's just as valid answer as something that makes sense. I am fine. Now, this is even worse when it comes to numbers. So, like we said, we actually want to know the user-defined speed. So I'm going to change that to speed. Now, we know that speed is a numerical quantity, so we want a number for that. But the computer doesn't know any different. So if I type in, I'm going to treat it just as valid as it would if I put in the number 5, for example. So we need to change that. And how do we do that? This is where the float command comes in. So I'm going to add a float command here. So float. Now, what does float do? Float allows us to input decimals and integers, basically, and it will make everything else invalid. So let's play that again. So run that. So speed, I'm going to put in 5. That's nice, it does that. But let's try something else. Let's try pancakes again. So it's not valid because it's not a valid float. Like I said, a float has to be numerical in nature. Now, that's all well and good. So let's replicate this and do it for time. So just copy that, easy enough to do. Input, and our other variable was time. Fantastic. And what's good about both of these is that we are telling the user this is what we want. We want the value for speed, we want the value for time. So now we're going to run that again. So speed, let's say 5, and let's say time, let's say 10 seconds. Okay. All well and good, but it hasn't actually achieved anything. So we need an equation, right? We need to actually use that to work out the distance. So we're going to say distance is equal to speed times time. So a couple of things there is that to work out, there always like a little gap here, so I'm going to do that. Now, here, we have this here. This means to multiply. This is a Python command, this dash means to multiply. Now, we've got a problem here because we've got red lines under S or T. Now, why is that? The computer doesn't know that the input that we're putting in for speed and time means S and T. We may, as humans with common sense, know that, but the computer doesn't. So we need to tell it that when we put in speed, that means the value of S. And this is quite simple. We're just going to say that S equals that. And then we're also now going to put that T equals that. Brilliant. And then we're going to run it. So speed 5, time 10. And part of the problem is that we actually don't know what's happened. Has it calculated D? Sure, but we actually don't have an output for that. And like I said, if anyone's watched my mathematical modeling video, you've got the input, which is use defined parameters. Then you've got the solving aspect, which is what we're doing here, but we actually need to print out an output. So we're going to type in print. Okay, and we're going to type in, well, what's our variable? Our variable is d. So print d, and what do I call it's come up d, because we've created a variable there. So we'll run that. Speed is 5, time is 10, and look, we come out with 50. Well, that's great. Couple of things though. So number one, we've got the decimal point there. Not a problem, because we could end up getting decimals. I could put speed as a decimal, I could put time as a decimal. Secondly, is that, again, we don't actually know that's a distance, and this we've seen the code. So we need to change that a little bit. So we're going to put down another comment, so distance. So we've got the inverted commas, we know it's common, and then we can put a comma there. So what this tells us is that this part here is this, will write out distance, and then this will tell us, the computer, that the variable is d. So d is the outcome of the calculation, and this will write distance is, and then whatever our value is, so in our case 50. So let's run that again. Speed, we will say 5 times 10, and distance is 50. Excellent. So now we know that what we've output is distance. So we've now created a very, very simplified mathematical model, but nevertheless we've done that. So a couple of things before we move on. Number one, let's say we wanted to only allow integer values of time. So if I run that, for example, I could put in a decimal, 4.5, and that's just as valid. But let's say if I wanted just whole numbers, then I would have to change that to integer. So I'm going to do that now, change that to integer. So then if I run that, speed is 5, but let's say I put in time again at 4.5, it will not allow it, because I have said that I only allow integer, which is whole number values. So that's one thing. Secondly, is that we haven't really defined units here. So I'm assuming that time is in seconds, speed is in meters per second, and distance would then give the answer in meters. That's fine, but that's an assumption. So we might want to convert between different units, and the next computational mathematics tutorial will show you how to do that using Python.